Tuesday is the recently installed People's National Party candidate for the East St. Catherine constituency, Dr. Winston Haye. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Haye.
Thank you very much. Just a quick correction, East Central St. Catherine.
East, oh yes, what did I say?
East Central it is.
East Central. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for
having me. So we want to talk about you making your entry into representative politics and what you are defining as your platform,
Absolutely.
what you bring to politics. Could you explain to us what you mean?
So after careful consideration, as you know, I'm a psychiatrist, being very clear to me, having been held up, for example, at gunpoint relatively recently, that issues of violence, that's playing a major role in our society. I recognize as a therapist that behavior change, especially in the addiction field that I'm in as an addiction psychiatrist, must be at the forefront. And so the concepts I'm bringing are twofold. Emotional intelligence, nothing about university, where people recognize that their thoughts lead to their feelings and by extension their behavior, one. And on the other hand, the whole concept of social engineering, where governments determine what's acceptable behavior for their people and ensure that there are educational processes in place to guarantee this. It doesn't bear fruit tomorrow or necessarily next year, but if we don't start somewhere with this concept, it's unlikely we'll achieve what we need to.
Dr. Haye, in light of what we've just said, considering that your comrade, Dr. Dayton Campbell, said that he doesn't know what toxic masculinity is, and given the amount of violence, particularly domestic partner violence, which we've had recently, the general state of violence across the island, do you think it appropriate for someone who's not only endorsing you, not only in your party, but at a rally announcing your candidacy, to be making such statements?
Well, we've had a response to that by the party. I have nothing to add or take away, save and except that any thoughts of homophobia, for example, or any form of discrimination as a psychiatrist, where I certainly fight against stigma for my patients because most are unable to do that themselves, then certainly we recognize that any such thought would be against my character, my upbringing, and my intellect. And so I want to state categorically that my campaign has no such thing included.
So you're repudiating Dr. Campbell's statement?
Absolutely clear that my campaign does not include any form of discrimination.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to talk to you about your concept of social engineering.
Right.
And when you talk about social engineering, there are some people whose eyebrows would be raised now and would be saying that sounds a little bit too draconian. It sounds a little bit as if that's not part of what is allowable in a democratic state.
Right.
What do you mean? How would you see social engineering impacting government policy, for example?
So let me give you an example. So a taximan determines that he's driving up against a one-way and curses at you who is driving in the appropriate direction, or a bike man, for example. Or someone whose shoe you step on at a session, especially if it's a clerk's, you may die. These are odd behaviors, and so what we're recognizing is that our people don't behave in normal ways, and I'm not suggesting it's the 3 million, but many persons don't. And unless we implement programs, we learn our values from our parents, from school, or Sunday school, or any other religion that you may be affiliated with. Some have lost their way, and we must ensure that we're starting with those young ones. That's where you start the education, with those who have missed their way and those currently perpetrating the violence. Very important. I've never heard this mentioned anywhere in politics in this country. And that certainly would be one of the main reasons I left my air-conditioned office to come out.
And I would think that's a strange place from which to engage a conversation about social engineering. This is politics, and to be honest, it doesn't bring out the best in most of us, including our politicians. And my colleague referred to you about the statement made at the launch of your candidacy, which then says to me then that a good question to ask you is, why do you bring that understanding of who we could be to politics? Because
I live that as an addiction psychiatrist. The patients I'm successful with, and it's a vast majority, have that behavior change through the work I do with them. If they can do it, then the rest of the country, with appropriate implementation of programs, and these are tested programs internationally. Many countries operate on appropriate social engineering, appropriate behavior. We need to at least have Jamaicans think that by spitting on the road, by urinating in a corner, especially if I'm selling jerk chicken afterwards, that's at least affecting my thought process that maybe what I'm doing is incorrect. Until we get there, we'll be struggling. So's, all those things are important, but certainly can't be the be-all and end-all. We must have a public health approach to violence, and that consists of three main principles. You prevent disease, you relieve suffering, and you heal the sick. Without that educational approach, we'll continue to struggle. I have children, I imagine you do as well, and we must ensure that I certainly choose to be here to live, work, raise my family. And it is why I'm here, and at this point, my best contribution at this time happens to be representational politics.
Dr. Haye, it sounds almost Singaporean.
That's one country, successfully.
But my question to you then is, how do you plan on legislating morality? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
Through training, we can adjust, it's what I do for work, how people think, by extension how they feel, and by extension how they behave.
From that standpoint now, through training, are we going to start at the secondary school level or primary school level, move up? I mean, what level of legislation is it going to take to implement this vision of yours? So
let's keep the public health approach. So you start by alleviating those who are suffering by taking care of their health using that concept. And so the person's being affected, you have programs, whatever you call it, which relieve the suffering. That's one end. On the other end, you prevent suffering. By preventing, you ensure you have these programs from kindergarten coming up, the do's and don'ts of persons. Many countries do this. Canada does this. I lived in a country that does this successfully, Hungary, where I did medicine. Cuba does it. Australia does it. You name the countries, they do it. And so this can be done in a democratic society. I love being here. The democracy that we share, where people say what they feel, whenever they want, how they want, but also recognize if they're inappropriate and make apologies for them, then we can do it. We can achieve this. Until we try, we'll never learn what it is to have peace in our country at the rate we're going.
You made some references to certain behavior patterns that we might find distressing in Jamaicans. One of them that, you know, we talk about all the time is how taxi drivers behave on the road.
Yes.
But that's one set of people. Then we talk about you were the chief medical officer for a number of years.
Correct.
We talk also just about what happens in hospitals and just
anywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. What I'm pointing to then is the complexity of the problem.
It is complex.
How does one say that, move that idea of emotional intelligence and social engineering, re-engineering?
Right. I'm not fazed by complexity.
Yeah.
And this is what really enlightened me. As chief medical officer, I'm sitting, and by the way, I straddled both administrations. I'm sitting at the table with persons who are making things happen. I'm now clear how things get on an agenda, how you work them, how you push them. I serve 2 excellent ministers of health, and I now have that under my belt, recognize if you're not at the table, you can't even get the crumbs. And so it is what I share with my constituents, that you need to get me there where I am able to represent you, to represent places like Lime Tree, places like Lakes Pen, where there are issues of job opportunities, issues of any road you turn off, Lakes Pen, of lighting, simple lighting, issues of housing, and road issues. I not only walk to meet the people, but to observe the issues as I go through. In other areas like Southborough, for example, in areas like Lime Tree, there are issues of theft, robberies. So these are all issues that we can solve. The one word we need to get out of our usage is bligh. So you must enforce the laws which are required to keep things safe. Doesn't work with a bligh.
We have to thank you. And
I thank you. I'm ready to come back whenever you want.
Okay.
Definitely, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Haye. Well, what's the very latest across the social media landscape? We'll find out now with Judy Bodley.